wonderful session that we have curated for you today called Salam Cinema, South Asian Voices for a Global Audience. Please welcome journalist Fifi Haroon, who will be the moderator for the session. Fifi, if you could join us. We are also very happy and honored that Saim Sadiq, a grand filmmaker, has also joined us. Saim, please join us. And you're also honored and grateful that Mr. Ahad Raza Mir has made a dash to come here. And the best, of course, has been kept for last, our superstar filmmaker, Mira Nair.
Salam, Mira Nair. Salam, Lahore. Thank you, all of you, for coming here today to welcome Mira to the heart of the Punjab. I'm going to do very brief introductions, only because, not because they are needed, but because, well, why not? When Mira Nair tweeted about being delighted to see Urdu signage on the Lucknow metro, she was instantly targeted by right-wing trolls and told to go to Pakistan. Luckily for us, she took them seriously and is back with us in Lahore for ThinkFest 2025. Mira, welcome back to this glorious city of the Punjab, the heart of Pakistan. I'm from Karachi and I still say that. We have seen how you have opened your heart to this city, be it through your films or your desire to return, which is why this city opens its heart to you as well. As for an introduction to Mira Nair, only for those of you who have been living in the dark or the North Pole since she burst onto the international film scene in 1988 with Salam Bombay, winning 23 international awards, including 2 at Cannes, and it was also nominated at the 1989 Academy Awards for Best Foreign Language Film. So Mira tells us our stories, and sometimes their stories, but only intricately woven into ours, with the kind of cross-cultural depth of knowledge and broad universal appeal that makes for great, watchable, mesmerizing cinema. A case in point, Myra Khan was gutted that she couldn't make the panel today, and she has asked me to convey a message to Mira, and I quote her, "Tell her I'm a huge fan. I watch her movies regularly every year for inspiration and joy." And of course, all these films that Mira has done, the joyful, inspirational, using Myra's words, Monsoon Wedding, which won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival in 2001, and Mississippi Masala, a celebration of Black and brown love in the Delta. Then my personal favorite, The Namesake, based on the book by Jhumpa Lahiri with Irrfan Khan, the wonderful Irrfan Khan, and Taboo in 2006, and later, more recently, her return to television in the BBC serial, A Suitable Boy in 2020, which made COVID quarantine bearable for many. Mira, such a pleasure to have you here with us, and we look forward to discussing so much of what is important to you and to all those of us who love cinema, and in Pakistan, also television. Since we are a country that has a very young population, 70% are under 30, we wanted to take advantage of Mira's experience, vast experience, and invite 2 very young men onto the stage who are now bounded by 2 women, right? Yeah, yeah.
Subtitle, we are old.
Speak for yourself, Mira.
आपने ऐसे ही बोला था ना.
And so we want a multi-generational conversation. I think that's very important, that we have the experience and we have the young Turks here with us? Saim, that was a giggle of sorts, yeah? Okay. So we want to see, what are the different trajectories to an impact beyond cultures and borders? And where indeed do we go from here to tell our stories? And how will our voices be heard? So Siam, the first of these fine young gentlemen, has brought much joy to genuine cinema goers in the land. You like the way I split joy and land? Yeah, okay. Saim Sadiq has the distinct honor of being the first Pakistani director to be celebrated in Cannes, and the dubious honor of his film Joyland being banned nonetheless in his home province of the Punjab. Not once, but twice. Joyland was finally approved for general release in the rest of the country, where I saw it, and which had already won 2 heartwarming awards in France, the Jury Prize and the Queer Palm, and was then shortlisted for the Oscars. But this wasn't Saim's first win at the time at the winning podium. Nice talking to you. His thesis film at Columbia University was awarded Vimeo's Best Director accolade, along with 5 other awards at the 2018 Thesis Film Showcase. He was also the recipient of the Kodak Student Scholarship Gold Award 2018, selected as the top winner from students across the world. Currently, he's working on 2 new films, apparently, which he plans to shoot in the next 2 years. Obviously not sitting still. One apparently is written by an Indian author based in Seattle. And I'm guessing here that it could be The Laughter by Sonora Jha, where an aging white male college professor becomes obsessed with his new Pakistani colleague, Rohaba Khan. And if it's not Saim, please do consider what seems to be a cracking story. So that's Saim Sadiq for you, Lahore's own, Pakistan's own. And Ahad Raza Mir. Yes, a bit of a heartthrob. Not a bit, a lot of a heartthrob. With 2 filmmakers gracing the stage, we thought of bringing on board a Pakistani actor who seems to cross the longitudes and latitudes of geography with remarkable ease. Ahad Raza Mir may be known in the West for a soulful interpretation of Hamlet on the Canadian stage that won him the Betty Mitchell Award in 2018. Then a scorching debut in Resident Evil in 2022, which left the Pakistani social media arguing endlessly over the singular kissing scene. We are like that only. For Pakistani television drama fans, he's far better known for memorable performances in serials like Yaqeen Ka Safar, Ahde Wafa, for which he was nominated for the Lux Style Awards. His forays into cinema include the blockbuster hit Parwaaz Hai Junoon in 2018. Ahad comes from solid acting stock. His father, Asif Raza Mir, charmed his way into Pakistani hearts with the quintessential Pakistani soap Tanhaiya. And it seems apt that his son is keeping the family tradition alive with more of the same. Currently, Ahad is filming for Pakistan's first serial for Netflix to be released later this year, not directed by Mira Nair, but even so. And we will try valiantly today to get him to let us in on some BTS secrets. Ladies and gentlemen, the finest panel in the world, right here. Mira, I came upon these burning questions that you were asked on the IMDb website. And in reply to one, you said, and I've condensed this for brevity, what inspires me most is resistance, the ability to speak truth to power. It's a terrible world, so movies, cinema, theater, and art is our chance to speak out. You have to really make your art matter. Can you elaborate on how this resistance plays out in your work and where you feel your art has mattered most?
Thank you so much, Fifi. I mean, I believe really that if we don't tell our own stories, no one else will. And if they tell them for us, I want to use an expletive, but I won't. They'll tell them terribly. So we better tell our own stories, and we better tell them also for ourselves. But in a way, this panel also exemplifies that that if the more local and specifically local our stories are, they become universal because the human being is the human being everywhere. So in my work, I seek to tell our stories, but I also seek not to pander, not to explain ourselves, but to to make our own humanity come alive in all its contradictions, in all its warts, in all its complexities, and particularly in all our very, very particular humor. That is what one of the things, the Punjabi humor is one of the things that I feel so deeply at home in Lahore with, because it's just like one, it's something I understand in my DNA, and not just understand, but deeply enjoy and feel a sense of almost relaxation that one I just don't have elsewhere. So if you can understand and trust where you come from, and understand that what we stand for is not something obscure and not something certainly inferior, but the ability to have the craft to take that story, like Saim, you also did in your unbelievable film that I think must have seen 3 times, because it was so truthful and yet completely um, well, unabashed and funny, without saying, look how funny we are. These are just how we are. But of course, what you showed us is something we hardly ever see, you know. But that is, well, that's why I make films, is I don't, you could call it resistance, but it could also um, call it, you know, what makes us particular, and with the confidence that came with time, of the fact that once you do that, other people out there, which I didn't start with believing. I remember when I made Mississippi Masala, which was about an interracial, you know, love story between an Indian, Ugandan Asian family who had been expelled by Idi Amin, comes to comes to dirt poor Mississippi in 1972, where the civil rights began with African American community largely, and the daughter of the Indian family falls in love with the African
Which
American.
sort of became your love story as well.
Well, well, you could say it's inspired by my love story, but not really. It was fueled by it, but it was not the same story. I mean, but I was, we were using the interracial love, really, which happens as, you know, what happens with one, the commonality that I thought and saw between the black community and the Asian community, and they never met except to employ, except how the Asians employed the blacks, but otherwise it wasn't at all something that you never hung out with anyone like that. But what happens when love happens, you know? And that was the premise, really, of Mississippi Masala. But I didn't know at the time of making it, this was 1991, who would see this film. It was very rare. I remember pitching it to the head of a studio, and I was quite, I had success with Salam Bombay, and they wanted to fund what I wanted to do next. But when I pitched the black and brown story, the head of a studio said to me, "Oh, Mira, you know," and I already had Denzel Washington signed up, but he hadn't become a star, but he was very, you know, admired. And the guy said to me, the head of the studio, you know, Mira, just make room for a white protagonist. And I, you know, smiled at him and I said, let me promise you that every waiter in this film will be white. And you know, he laughed at me and he smiled, and he showed me the door basically, and I smiled, and there was something in my gut that told me every rejection tells me that I'm on the right path. You've got to take real, you've got to get the dhakka from rejection, you know, to propel you, because there's a lot of rejection out there for people who not just look like us, but who think and believe like us. So you've got to get fueled by it instead of being defeated by it. And that's a tough one, but we have to do that, you know. Anyway, so these are the premises that still continue. You know, I'm making a film now on Amrita Shergill, the great painter. And it's taken me, this is the 5th year. I've worked on it 4 years. It's the 5th year because they don't know, the West doesn't know, the Asian, you know, subcontinent admires, but say, kaun aayega theater mein kaun aayega, whatever the reasons are that they dissuade you.
But then when you make the film, she's going to be as well known as Frida Kahlo.
Absolutely, and beyond, I think. But anyway, that is part of our process. You know, the rejection must fuel us, because otherwise there's no really other way. And you must surround yourself with people who perhaps believe in you and who cherish, that creative community. In any case, so long-winded answer, but these are the reasons and ways that I keep going. But I'm not here to make Sunday afternoon pleasant movies with white people across coffee shops. You know, I'm just not that person. So I'm not going to do that. There are lots of people who do that, but I'm not. And I guess you could call that
And
resistance.
we're lucky that you're not.
Oh, well, thank you. But
Thank
that
you.
is fuel for my system. Yeah, thank you.
I just want to acknowledge that there are many in the fraternity which are with us today, sitting in the audience. There's Mira Nair's namesake, Mira ji. Please stand up and take a bow. And I've just spotted Nadia Jamil, Lahore's very own. And there's somebody else who I'm not allowed to say who he is, but you may see him in the front row. Yeah, Ali Sethi. He's holding his head, but you're very loved here, Ali. Welcome back. Okay. So this is a question for both Saim and Mira. In many ways, despite the thematic universality of your films, it's difficult to imagine Joyland finding its dancing feet in a place other than Lahore. Similarly, The Namesake is an ode to Calcutta. Salam, Bombay to India's vibrant coastal city. How important is place to the telling of stories, and how conversely do we resist the temptation to exoticize places for Western eyes? How relevant, for example, has your cinema verite training been, Mira? Or is it okay to propagate these cities as the exotic?
Saim, please. Nahin, nahin.
ये पहले आप करते
please.
we're not in Lucknow. Let's proceed.
Sorry. No, I'm just very aware every second I speak, I'm kind of taking time away from her, and I feel like me, including everybody else, also.
We're
just
not
wanna listen
ending
to her
this
more than
early.
speak.
We're not ending this early. We're going to go overtime. I'm telling everybody in the organization.
Sense of place, I think. Sorry about my throat. It's very important. I don't think I would ever make the film if I hadn't had the lived experience of being in Lahore, if I wasn't a Punjabi, if I couldn't make it in Punjabi even. I think I'm like exclusively, like there's nobody even like in my family far that's even married out of Punjabi, so we're very kind of inbred. But in a way that's lovely and beautiful because of the language, because of the humor, which is such an intrinsic part of who I am and what I like and what I respond to. But also Lahore is very particularly toxic, also in a very unique way, in the way our family systems work, in the way we treat each other sometimes with a bit too much love, a bit too much intrusion. And all of those things I think were so inherently Lahore, because when I travel, even within the country, I go to Karachi, it is not the same thing. Family systems are very different there. I mean, not very.
We have families in Karachi.
Of course, I'm saying in terms of how toxic. I mean, I'm sure Karachi families can be very toxic as well. Families all around the world can be loving and beautiful and toxic, and that's how it is.
I'm trying not to nod too much.
Yeah, but the brand of the specific intricacies in which they kind of play out in your day-to-day life, it's very Lahore, I think, that film. And I don't know, particularly, of course, if we didn't have that sort of theater world, which I made 2 films about it. I'm still almost like incessantly obsessed with it because it's so hilarious and funny and magical, that I don't know where else I would place that film.
Yeah. Mira?
Well, I did come to make feature films through a very immersive study for more than 7 years of making pure cinema verite, cinema of truth. It was called cinema verite. The sort of handheld camera, living with people you making a film about. I made a film called India Cabaret, in the Joyland world, where I lived with the strippers in a Bombay nightclub for months, for 6 months. My parents disowned me temporarily, and but it is the world, it is the, and of course they thought I was a stripper, so that immediately, because I lived with them, with the dancers, that immediately put me into the space of what are the double standards in our very patriarchal society that these women have to live with, and not just live with, but transcend with their own sense of humor and their own sense of respect and dignity. And if you feel the way they feel, your characters feel, then you know that your heart is wide open and that you're on the right track, because it's very, very painful half the time. So place and people are intrinsic, really, and it both creates for me a sense of deep respect. You have to listen, you have to, in order to gain their trust, you have to really be a student, and really be a surrendering, to them, because they are too smart to just allow you into their lives, unless they want you in there, So place is vital. Actually, I want to just segue to this beautiful film that is out now called All We Imagine Is Light. It's a beautiful film made by Payal Kapadia in Bombay, and it is about the city in a way that I haven't seen a film about the city since, actually, not to compare notes only, but since Salam Bombay, which was a complete tribute and a salam to this city at that time, 1987. It's almost a period film now. We couldn't, there's no question that we could have made that film about any other place, because in Bombay, as in Karachi and some places here, people come from everywhere to make a living, street kids, all kinds of, and the language of Bombay has become this wonderful Bombay patois, which is a mix of all our languages, that is very much the foundation of humor and vocabulary and how people talk. You can't, I mean, of course, it never was used in our Bombay movies. It was because I used it, because the character spoke like that in India Cabaret, the documentary I made before Salam Bombay, that gave me the courage to make a feature film like that. Because the language is so rich and layered. And it's like I felt that in the language of Joyland, because it's not only just Punjabi, it's Punjabi in all its kind of Urdu, dialect, all kinds of things mixed up. And similarly, in Monsoon Wedding, if I had pitched that to a regular Gora distributor, they would have just shown me the door, because in every sentence, like we are in here, in every sentence we speak 3 languages: Hindi, Punjabi, Urdu, English, सब कुछ मिला के अच्छा लगता है ना, वैसे ही हम बोलते हैं. तो so they, and I didn't, it was such a low budget movie that no one asked me questions, and then we make it like that. But it adds, I can't think of it doing it another way. Lucknow was the heart of A Suitable Boy. It was the heart of who Vikram Seth even imagined as his Brahmpur, was Lucknow. And I can't imagine making that film, anywhere else with any kind of layers of authenticity in it, So place is vital, and I now think, now that I am on the other, made 20 films for almost 30, 40 years, I just long to return to the gutter, to the streets, to really go back to what people are genuinely living with, whether it's struggle or whether it's beauty. That's what, because I want the comfort of the place, actually, of wherever the story might be settled, set. So for me, place is absolutely the foundation of a
Mira,
story
what
I want
about
to
the
tell.
exoticizing a place, which Hollywood often does to the subcontinent, to the Arab world, to the Middle East? I remember there was an episode of what was it? I can't remember the name of the series, but where it was set in Pakistan, and people were speaking Arabic in the streets. Homeland, was it? Yes. Joyland, Homeland, all of those. Yeah, yeah. So how do we resist that temptation? Because you shoot in such scenic places. How can you not have an ode to Calcutta, for example?
Well, you can have an ode to Calcutta, and you can do it in a way that is
exactly
that the story needs, rather than just a picture postcards of the city, or having every second person be called Babu Moshai. And the thing about the namesake was that it was Jhumpa's vision of New York and the West, which I know also quite well. And it was her vision of a returning non-resident to Calcutta. But I grew up 12 summers in Calcutta, so I knew that Calcutta, the same era of that Calcutta, the 70s. In a way, I grew up there. So I brought to that a dimension. For instance, you know, in Loreto or any kind of school, you're taught elocution. So when you have an arranged marriage, that first scene when Irrfan sees Taboo for the first time, she recites the Wordsworth's the daffodils, you know. And it was something we used to be made to do, you know, in school there, which Jhumpa didn't quite know about. So we made this lovely melange of that person who did not grow up there, but who looked at it, and a person who grew up there, like myself. So those kinds of meetings are very important to make a city also come alive, you know. I think in terms of exoticization, people like this on our panel here, we just have to be on guard, you know. We have to be able to spot it when they are placing you as whoever they'll place you, you know. They'll place you, I mean, they all think, it's like the Hispanic population. You think Puerto Rican is Cuban, is Bolivian, is Colombian, but it's vastly different, similarly to us. So we as actors, you must talk about this, because it must be so difficult to counter what they are asking you to do, if they are asking you to do these things. Is it? I'm going to try to make you speak.
Do answer.
Oh, I will. First of all, thank you. I'm very happy to be here amongst all of you today. It's an honor to be here. But on that note, I feel, for me as an actor, I've taken it upon myself whenever I go abroad, whether I'm working abroad or just, you know, whether it's the theater work or the film and TV work. I find that it's important to give people abroad an authentic representation of who we are, because I feel that sometimes that's so twisted at times from what people have. And I've lived my life abroad. I know how people see Pakistanis, Indians, Bengalis, all of us. And I find that it's our responsibility as artists to show them who we are, what we're made of, and kind of in the sense that when I've worked abroad, when I did a show where I played, I was playing an Indian sapper for this show in the BBC, and they looked to me to kind of be as accurate as I could be with the role. So really, it's on us. It's not up to the people abroad who are just gonna kind of use us for, to be honest, with the skin and with the language. It's up to us to give that accurate representation, because no one else is gonna do it for us. Whether it's from filmmaking or performance, it's I find our responsibility. And yeah, I guess that's the best way to answer it. It is really on us. You look at films like, for example, Joyland, which gives such a good representation of Lahore and kind of the things that we deal with in our own countries. And you know, I find pride in going abroad and taking that responsibility.
You played Hamlet, Ahad, and won an award. Despite your ethnicity, you don't look very like the prince.
I don't look Danish at all.
You don't look Danish at all. But you were convincing because you won that award. How tough is it for actors of color to find mainstream roles in international projects? And to what extent are they marginalized in larger white stories?
I think it depends. If we speak about theater, which, you know, a great chunk of my work that I've done abroad has been on stage, I find that there's still a bit of colorblind casting. It's got more to do with your skill, your talent, your knowledge of the text versus how you look. So when I speak about, you know, Hamlet, which I've done 2 productions of now, the cast has always been mixed. There's been, you know, white people, black people, Asians, South Asians. So I think that's the real beauty of theater, is that at the end of the day, everybody kind of sees themselves represented. And I find that maybe Canada especially was a bit ahead of its time. And as time has gone by, it's been, you know, 8 years since I lived there, and things have changed. You know, people are, and productions have become more, what's the word I'm looking for? They want that authentic representation of their societies, because Canada, America, the UK is actually not just white anymore. You go walk down the streets of London, other look to Pakistani, Indians hote hain, so it's, you see that now, that is the society. But when we move on to like film and television, obviously we move on to, you know, hyper-realism. You can't have, unless it's experimental, you can't have too much of a mix, unless it's, like I said, if it's a show set for World War II, you need those specific actors to be playing those roles. And what happens is it becomes competitive. So they want the best of the best to be part of the productions. And that's where color kind of plays a role. That's where color comes in and then talent comes in. But that's why I've always really appreciated theater, because that color is not really seen. That veil has been lifted. So yeah, and I hope that, and in recent times I find that, the content has changed. You look at Netflix and Amazon, a lot of our stories are being told, and I think it's only going to get better.
Yeah. Mira, the one actor that you cast and fired twice. Cast twice, fired once. Irrfan Khan, the wonderful Irrfan Khan, who I was very lucky to have met in London, seemed to have been embraced by the West and headlined many films before his untimely demise. What was it, and this is for, maybe those aspiring actors out there, what was it about Irrfan that allowed him to make that transition? I mean, right till the end, Irrfan was always unapologetically Indian in all his films, never an American accent in sight, really.
Well, I didn't fire Irrfan, please.
He was supposed to be in Salam, Bombay,
No,
and then
no,
he was too tall.
He was in Salam, Bombay.
But not the role.
Well,
Yes.
so I can speak about that, but
Yes.
it wasn't a firing. It was anyhow.
Yeah.
I wanted in Salam, Bombay, because I was an actor myself
Yes.
in the theater, and worked with, and then went into cinema verite filmmaking. So I was very sure that with Salam, Bombay, I would work with real street kids as opposed to convent school boys or whatever, upper class kids, because the map of life, of struggle, of their desire for a childhood, and yet a flamboyant way of living it large, even if they had nothing, comes from the streets themselves. And I didn't want to teach that to a kid who had never been left his mother's bed, And everything about kids on the street shows that, their eyes, their map, their hands, the callousness, the calluses on their hands, everything reveals the tough existence. So it was always going to be a workshop with many street kids. All the kids in Salam are from the street. And I wanted to mix it up with 2 or 3 actors, trained actors. And Irrfan, I went to the National School of Drama, which is our leading institution. And in the basement, I found a workshop going on. And I saw this very tall, hooded-eyed 18-year-old. He was 18 at the time, Irrfan. And I loved his intensity of listening. He was an amazing listener, Irrfan. He observed before he spoke anything, and he was listening in a way that was so intense. And that was the first thing that grabbed me. The second thing was, of course, his look, which was inimitable and very, very mysterious. I think for actors, there is a sense of mystery I always look for in them, because to be what you see is what you get is not interesting after, about 10 minutes, So it's this kind of, what will he reveal, or what will she, what was going to that mystery is something I look for, and it's an ineffable thing. I can't describe it beyond that. Anyway, Irrfan very much had that. Besides being a humble person who was going to be willing to surrender to, I'd literally asked him to leave school, and it's a prestigious school, and come live with me in an empty flat with a bunch of kids in Bombay, on an experiment for several months. And he said yes, and I had no background, no reputation of sorts before that. Anyway, so the reason then we started this workshop, but Irrfan was 6'3" I think, tall. And the kids on the street are all malnourished, and they reached his torso. They were tiny. And he was going to be Salim, part of a gang. And literally, visually, there was no way he fit in. He was double their size. And that was why I had to appeal to him. And I said, Irrfan, you just can't, it's not convincing. And he wept. He did weep. And I pretty much wanted to weep, but directors shouldn't and can't weep. But he understood. And I combed the script for what he could play, and it was just this one wonderful scene that Sunit Arapurwala, the writer, had written of the scribe who writes the letter home for the tea boy. And it's still his first scene in celluloid. And And I said, I'll never forget you, and I'll always come back. But it took 15 years to find Ashok Ganguly, the namesake, heart of namesake, and that film. And there was never a question that it would be anyone but Irfan. I just called him up. We had stayed friends.
And Irfan and Taboo together.
It's extraordinary, and that was the film that opened the doors for him to be in several things that he made. And one of the unsung things that not many people know is his wonderful HBO series, In Treatment, that he plays an amazing character in that film. But anyway, so it's a huge loss really to cinema and to the world and to our dosti to
To
lose
the world
him.
of South Asian cinema, to all of us.
Every cinema, really, because everybody really would have wanted to work with him. The month he died, Alejandro Inarritu, whom I know well, called me up and asked me to talk to Irfan for his sake. And he was too ill. I mean, every great director wanted to work with Irfan by the end, but we didn't know it was the end, you see. Anyway, so that was the story of that. But yeah, so it was.
Thank you, Mira. Just wanted to pay tribute to that great actor that we produced in the subcontinent. Saim, you call Joyland, and you mentioned this earlier, a family drama. But it is a family drama that seemed to have riled up the moral brigade, from right-wing fashion designers to the then Punjab government. It was finally released by the censor with cuts, mainly of those parts that dealt with a relationship between the male lead and a trans woman dancer. You've said a few times that while you accepted other rejections from festivals as a young filmmaker, the censoring of Joyland in Pakistan left you heartbroken. What advice would you give other young Pakistani filmmakers who might face something like this?
I don't know. I mean, like, I don't know if I should take my advice even if I give it. But, I can only speak from that one experience. That's why I feel a little kind of like a cheat saying that, oh, because of my one experience, I have learned this and this is going to apply for all of you as a big learning. Because Pakistan is such a weird place. Sometimes you make something and they let it pass. And sometimes they're in the mood and the zeitgeist is sort of, not the right time for you to release something. Kapoor and Sons is a film where, a big actor who we all love and respect played a gay character. It released in theaters. My mother went and watched it. Nothing was censored and she was very happy. And, like everybody seemed to have been okay with it. And that was before Joyland. And suddenly Joyland came, and suddenly, because it was a Pakistani film, and because we were now suddenly talking about our people, or for whatever other reason, it caught on fire in this weird, unimaginable, ununderstandable
Because
way.
we, of course, are so pure that we can.
I mean, I'm
never
not. I don't know who
indulge
is,
in these
but
things, yeah.
so yes, it was very heartbreaking, and I think the lesson is that it passes. I guess eventually you make something with the right intentions, and it faced that one big roadblock. But I'm also just so keenly aware of the fact that it also did so much that it was not supposed to do in a good way. It was my first film. I was 30 years old when I made it. I thought I'm gonna watch it, and maybe some of my friends will watch it, and
We're all good friends.
so I also lucked out majorly in many other places, and so I guess for me, I look at it in a way that, okay, this was there to sort of balance it out for me, that you got too much good, and so a little bit of struggle with the Pakistani censor board, and also honestly, like it was my first film, so I was too cocky to want to release it in a theater also. And everybody told me, why do you need to? It's not because a film like that was never going to make too much money in Pakistan. Anyways, we have such few theaters that it's not really from a business perspective that I wanted to release it in a theater. I was just like, I want to see my own film in a theater with an audience in Lahore, because I had seen it. I'd seen it in France, I'd seen it in Toronto, I'd seen it in the US. And so I was like, I want to see it like this, with just to feel that, okay, the people who it was made for in a way, and who it's really about, and who will understand it more than anybody else in a way. Like, it's Indians and Pakistanis. A lot of people from the US or from the West always find it to be a way more depressing film than it is, because they can't understand the humor, because it's not laugh out loud, but there's so much of it that's lost on an outside audience that I wanted to experience with a local audience. And so I pushed for it to be released in a theater, and in a way I could have avoided that by just putting it, online, and we didn't need to. Um, but yeah, so I learned the lesson of being like, no, sometimes you just listen to wisdomous advice from like other filmmakers who have had a similar experience before and who warned me. But I had fun eventually going to a Karachi Newplex and just watching it with an audience, and I think that was worth it.
So if not Lahore, then at least Karachi. Okay. Ahad, we're talking about families. Mira's films are also, Monsoon Wedding was about a family. And you said, Mira, that it was once you had Nasiruddin Shah as the head of the family, everything else sort of fell into place. Everything was around him, really. And then Ahad, every second Pakistani drama is about family. We're obsessed with family and cousin marriages. Um, and second marriages. You know that only something like 0.1% of Pakistanis have married twice, have two wives. But I think about 70% of Pakistani dramas do feature them. Um, Surprising facts, yes. But coming back to you, Ahad, as an actor, how limited do you feel by these roles that you get in Pakistan? And even though we have a massive audience for Pakistani dramas, do you sometimes feel that you are asked to play the same role again and again?
No. Um, that's a good question. I find that I mean, I don't want to say that I'm very selective about what I pick and choose. It's not about that. It's more about what's the story I have to tell. There's something inside of me that I feel like I need to express, whether it's through a role or through a story. And I find that yes, some of the stuff can get repetitive, but I think it's up to the actors to kind of pull something out of the story. I find that maybe I call myself a lazy actor, to be honest with you. That's only because I find that a character that has a bit of baggage, a character that has a backstory, a character that has uh, things they haven't dealt with yet are the most interesting roles to play. And I say that's why I think I'm a lazy actor, because it's all kind of placed out before me. And now I have to interpret how I'm going to go about it. And some of the roles that I've done have been, if you think about it, quite simple. They're simple roles, but it's really up to the actor. It's the actor's responsibility to pull something out of the text, and I think that's all due to good writing. When there's good writing, it just makes the actor's job easier. And I find that, for example, I always go back to Shakespeare. I hate doing it, but it just works. Is that when an actor studies Shakespeare, they become a detective. They learn how to break down a script, and so I find that when I'm reading, 20, 26 episodes of something, I have to sit down and go, all right, what am I going to put into this that's going to be unique for myself and for the audience and for the story? And how's it going to set itself apart from the rest? So I find that it's the actor's job to put in the flavor, I think, into their own roles, and there's no other way around it. And I think that there's a lot of diversity in the content that's coming out now. We've got stuff that's action-based, there's rom-coms, there's the family dramas. So I think that diversification is happening slowly. I mean, we've moved on from, I think, from a bit of the saas bahu stuff to more kind of interesting and meatier stories. So I think that change is happening. Yeah, but I think, see, the point there was it was a story about four friends. And so the uniqueness behind that is we don't get to see that on screen much. It's about four male actors and their friendship and how they come together, how they fall apart, and what their trajectories in their lives are all about. My character didn't know what he wanted to do with his life. He goes into the army. One character decides, I don't know what I'm going to follow this. So it's a coming of age story, and so we have so few of those, and I think that might be a big part of the success behind that show.
I was reading today the great Polish director Krzysztof Kieslowski, who did the Decalogue and amazing films. And he was talking about acting in films. And he said for the actor, they have to not just read. It's like what you just said, you not just read the text and what the text is telling the actor to do, but for the actor, he or she must find in themselves something not necessarily known to them, but must go really deep into themselves to understand what they would bring of themselves that is particular and personal and sometimes even confusing to that role, because without that the character the role becomes lifeless and becomes a cliche.
It's like finding yourself,
It's
but
you have
at a new address.
you have to do exactly, and that is a revelation of from within, and that is the tough call. And it's especially tough when you have a cliche, let's say, of a script. Then you have to really ask yourself, are you going to really do this, or are you then doing it to bring something very within yourself to it? Otherwise it just becomes mud.
And I guess that brings up the question, like for filmmakers or actors, is why do we do it, right? I think sometimes you could say we do it for the audience, you could say you do it for yourself, and I don't know how to answer that question really. It's just there's something inside us that wants to tell the stories. There's something that compels us from inside to say, okay, this is a story I want to tell. Whether or not you have the answer to that question of why you're doing it, something inside you says, okay, there's something here that I don't know what it is exactly, but it's there, and I feel like I have the responsibility to jump on it now.
And what will you bring to that? That is the strange and kind of exquisite journey that an actor must go through. Yeah.
Can I? Okay, this is working, I think. Um, that sounded like an audition for Mira right there. Ahad. Good one. A good one.
Never know.
Yeah, you never know.
It wasn't.
Um, Mira, you looked at Indian cabaret for your first major documentary.
India Cabaret. Yeah.
You looked at India cabaret. I stand corrected. Saim, you explored the world of trance dancers in your thesis films, Darling, and then again in Joyland. What is it about this glittering body world that fascinates you both? And what do you think fascinated your audience?
In many things, I think. I just find it to be, particularly in Pakistan, and I'm sure it's a little bit different from India in that sense that we have fewer avenues of entertainment in general. Barely have any parks. We used to have some Indian movies, now we don't have those as well. Cinemas are empty. I just, me and my friends, when we want to hang out, we don't know what to do and we don't know where to go sometimes. And the nice thing about the Punjabi theatre world was that even though in our class, which is an upper middle class or a middle class, we kind of look down upon it and it's considered to be some kind of a form of entertainment for the lower classes. But at least they have a place to go, which we don't in a way. And secondly, because of how that particular world functions. Usually it's an all male audience, and I just used to find it fascinating. It's not only trans dancers, actually trans dancers are very few in that world, but it's the cis women who command the audience. And there is something so fascinating about how powerful they are, not just on the stage, but even behind the stage, when you used to spend time there and just like hang out for months, meeting different producers, ADs, the dancers, their makeup guys, etc. It was just fascinating because these women were real stars for me, and it didn't matter if it was in a world that we look down upon because it's not to our taste, or because we think it's lowbrow or a B-grade form of entertainment. For me, it was interesting to just see that in their head, they're beautiful and amazing, and for a big audience, a bigger audience than our movies actually find in theaters, because the mature theaters are always full on a weekend, which is not something you can say about cinemas. And a big audience finds this fascinating, and they have at least an outlet of entertainment. So for me, I think, and particularly in Pakistan, where the gender dynamics are so sort of rigid outside of that theater, but inside, I think it was at least a place where sexuality was out in the open, where the people who were working there were so much more open-minded than I'd ever met anybody else outside the theater. And that kind of contradiction was just fascinating and interesting for me to explore. And also just, of course, the hypocrisy of the fact that all the men who come and watch these shows eventually sort of step out and pretend that they don't and become this, very pious, and that sort of double life, I think, was just a nice sort of place for me to set a story about a guy who's, living a double life as well.
Yeah, it's that double line that fascinated me. I made India Cabaret in 1985, and it was about that dividing line: who creates? I mean, who determines who is a good woman, and who determines who is a bad woman? And I wanted to explore that division and who creates that line, because even as a child I questioned, okay, who does this, who will cast the first stone, so it was in finally finding this cabaret house called Meghraj in Ghatkopar that allowed me in, and these two dancers, Rekha and Rosie, with whom I lived, that allowed me into their lives, that I could actually enter, and as I said before, be almost mistaken for one of them. And they were women who knew that respect was denied them, but they wanted to. One of them, Rosie, was perfectly happy with being as sexy as she could at night in her dance, and Rekha was like had this completely bawdy sense of humor about seeing through the other world that she had forsaken, which is the world of respectability. Because yes, like you said, only men come to the club and revel in what they do. But the minute they finish their little act and go back into the green room, it's like they cover themselves, and they even while they're dressing for themselves, they're dressing under a sheet. It's remarkable how modesty shifts from one thing to another. And the whole thing with the reversal would happen, because the waiters would come into the green room saying, omelette khaiye ji, kuch to khaiye. There was a whole reversal where young other men would look after them, but they would not let anybody else see them in without clothes on, in the way that they would in their act. And these women, Rosie would revel in her sex appeal and so on. But one time in the middle of making the movie, her sister was getting married and she was going home to Hyderabad with money for the sister's dowry, and we followed her. And as she entered the village, it was an absolutely poor place. Her mother met her at the door of the house and did not let her come into the house because she would pollute the auspicious ceremony of marriage, but of course take the money away from her. And so they would face these daggers of blame and exploitation even within their own families. And in this, alcohol became kind of my best friend, because the men who come to see them were always drunk. And I persuaded one of them, Mr. Pujara, to let me come home with him. My poor mother must have just gone flipping in Delhi, but she didn't know about this. Anyway, so I went back with Mr. Pujara to live with his wife and his extended family. And there I'm making parathas with the wife for like weeks on end. And she tells me, I dream, I have this, but I dream of freedom. I dream that one day I will, she tells me her dreams. And, I put them, this triangle together of the women denied respectability, but having a life of a very interesting kind of freedom, and a woman who has all respectability, who dreams of freedom. And you wonder, really, who is the more free? So that was the exploration that led me to make India Cabaret. But 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 in the making of Cinema Verite, you don't know what the story will yield. You have to just live with the story and see how it unfolds, which is both the challenge and the beauty of making documentary, in that way, not the documentaries so much one sees now. So that was the exploration. Who creates a good woman? Who creates somebody that is not considered outside good, that is considered outside goodness? And that's the exploration. And it was really very much what I saw in Joyland. Who creates that?
We're down to one mic, Sam, so thank you. We'll share. There's so many questions that one wants to ask. I mean, I could go on forever asking questions from these three wonderful people. But I do want to open it to the floor. I'm not even looking at the time. I don't care anymore. And this is Lahore, and we can do anything we want. Okay? So I wanted to ask Saim a question about this, but keeping the time in order, if you haven't seen it, 2 nights ago I saw Nice Talking to You, which is a delightful little film about a Lebanese girl and British guy finding a silent bond on her last night in New York. And they think they're both deaf and they can't speak, so they talk in sign language, and finally they realize they can both speak. I mean, they tell each other they can both speak. Wonderful film. So please do watch it if you haven't seen it. Um, it's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. Um, nice talking to you. Great film. Okay, the last question before we open it. Mira, could we talk a little bit about your experience? I think you set up some kind of forum or a group in Uganda where you were working with local initiatives. And I found that very interesting that, teaching people how to make films, how to tell their own stories.
Yep.
And I think it's very relevant to Pakistan. Very relevant because even after a big blockbuster like Mola Jat last year, our film industry is dwindling. We're making less films again than we used to. And it's very sad, but should we just feel happy that we have our dramas are so successful, and maybe drama is which will take Pakistan wherever it has to go in terms of international fame? Or is there anything from your experience that would benefit us in giving Pakistani cinema a lifeline? And then if once Mira talks about that, Saim and Ahad, if you could add a little of how you think Pakistani cinema's trajectory can change.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, 16 years ago, I set up with a bunch of really wonderful people, Maisha, which is a Swahili word which means zest for life, in Uganda, where I also live, to create basically a local film culture. Because I have like an ankle in Hollywood, but when they knew I moved to East Africa, I would get the few and far between African films. And of course, even if you see Cry Freedom, the film on Steve Biko, the great revolutionary from South Africa, it's really about Donald Woods, the white journalist who helped Biko escape. It's not really about Biko, and so on. And the films I would receive were things like White Mischief, to make as a director, which is really about a white, colonial couple's neurosis while the faceless Maasai warrior stands in the sunset of the African savannah, and it's never about the extraordinary beauty and the dignity and the struggle too of where you live, So hence Maisha was created with the mantra, if we don't tell our own stories, no one else will. And I invited several, it was a free school. I raised money and we had 6 workshops a year of production and writing, screenwriting, and then finally documentary as well. Any director, I believe that people want to do good, you just have to create a platform where they can. Any director from, Stephen Frears to Abdurrahman Sissako to, Forrest Whitaker came. I mean, any people who I asked to come mentor would pretty much make room in their lives to come mentor for 2 to 3 weeks with our students who came from East Africa. And now, the last week, when we ended the school, which is it ran for 16 years, we now have 28 feature film directors and an entirely extraordinary local culture, and and that's critical because it's not enough just to make your own stories, but you must make them with craft and rigor and real excellence. Because Saim, I mean, the beginning, the third world films, as we were called, were so we had to apologize for their quality, and I just never wanted that. Even with Salam Bombay, we put a lot of money into 35 millimeter, into really doing it as best we could. And that was what we were trying to teach, that level of craft at Maisha. So this is important, for Pakistan's actually shown the world the great craft of dramatic television story making. I mean, really, it's sort of the epitome of it anywhere. But if you, I mean, just I would not know more about how to help the whole system here. But for me, the great thing is to teach excellence, which is say why you went to Columbia or why you go to these schools, which are unaffordable for most people. How to bring that kind of level of rigor home to us in Pakistan or India. That was what was important for me, Um, And that has to be coupled with, I think, from your story, Saim, it has to be coupled with a real wake-up call to the governments at large. It happens in India too all the time. Kama Sutra, a film I made, was banned, and so on. We can go into censorship. It has to be coupled with a very open-eyed view of what is censorship. Who are we censoring? You know, if we want to stand in the world here, but also in the international world, you've got to open your eyes to what flies as cinema, not to some notion of old-fashioned cinema that has to be portrayed. So I think that that coupling of training and rigor, as well as a wake-up call to censorship, a re-examination of what must be censored and who does the censoring. It's back to India Cabaret. Who are you to censor? You know, it has to be brought together. Anyway, that's just my.
Well, I think for us here, actually globally, cinema-going culture has just changed. I think a lot of us feel going to the cinema has become a bit of a luxury. It's not cheap. There's a lot of money that goes into it. If a family of 4 or 5 are going, you know, you're buying your popcorn, you're getting your seat, you're getting to the cinema. It's become an expensive endeavor for some people. And beyond that, I think with the introduction of all the OTT platforms, that convenience of being at home, I mean, we often think to ourselves, well, if I can just watch it at home for a fraction of the cost and pause it whenever I have to go to the washroom, I mean, it's an opportunity people will take. And I think with...
That is a viable platform as well.
Absolutely.
It's taking us everywhere in the world.
Yeah, and so with a lot of the films that came out, be it Joyland, In Flames, Gunja, like I've seen all these films that came out, and they were excellent films. Like you talk about excellence, they were films that I felt were technically sound, artistically were telling a great story, but it was still entertaining. I think the issue again is just the cinema-going culture has changed, and now with the introduction of OTT, I think it's important for us to kind of make that shift of convenience, really. I think at the end of the day, you know. And I think beyond that, it's the point is that I think we still need to make content. We need to make films. We need not be deterred by, oh, no one's going to go to the cinema. People will still make films. Films have a long lifespan. So I think that's the best way to answer it, is to just is adaptability, really.
I think sort of this. I mean, Mira was mentioning the state, so I was just thinking it's hard to kind of the state that we have keeps changing. So by the time you figure out how to appease the folks who are in power, they're not in power anymore. So I think it's also such a big sort of battle. So I wouldn't know what to do, how to sort of make the industry or just filmmaking culture a little bit better through that. But the other two are the filmmakers and the audiences. I think for filmmakers and particularly producers and studios and whoever is sort of has the power to make multiple things, I think my plea would be to sort of encourage more individual voices to allow people to tell the story that they want to tell rather than trying to preempt what the audience wants to watch, because nobody knows what the audience wants to watch and there's an audience for everything. So I think just sort of inculcating a little bit more of that from the people who are making multiple films, like the studios, etc., and the channels. And for the audience is, again, the same thing that Mira said about censorship. And I was thinking, of course, we talk about censorship because it's our film and we're affected by it directly. Or so you would think that we are the most affected. But I think because it's such a big room, I do feel like saying that you should be offended too, because censorship is actually insulting to your intelligence as well, because you are being told what you can and cannot watch, that you're not smart enough or you're not sensitive enough to decide that, okay, I've seen a film, what do I want to take from it and what do I not want to take from it? So I think actually it's most insulting to the audiences, and I just want to say that because it's such a big room. Yeah.
They're telling me we have 5 minutes, but we will take 10 minutes. So questions now from the audience, belatedly, but still. Please ask really intelligent questions because we want to impress Mira ji here, Mira Nair, not Mira ji, sorry. Mira Nair here. And ji, Mike, this one's not working. This one's not. So we'll keep passing it around. No, Mira, if you could just share yours with Ahad, and I'll share this one, and we should.
This one is working now.
Is it working again? Okay.
So,
Take yours, I want mine.
Wow.
Go ahead. Thank you.
hello and assalamu alaikum everyone. Am I audible?
Oh, well, okay.
So, my name is Tirza Atar, and I am a third semester student studying at one of the prestigious universities of Lahore. And the reason I tell all of you this is that I firmly believe that the future is youth. And I have come here today for the first time at ThinkFest with my mother, with my siblings, and I want to give a huge shout out to Sir Abraham for arranging such talks. So,
Okay.
my question is from Ahad. I have been fangirling you since 5 years, and you are so hard to find that, oh, I'm just living my dream right now. So, thank you for being here. So, you are our theater guy. So, there's this concept of breaking the fourth wall in theater. So, how important do you feel is to break that fourth wall being an actor and for the audience? For those who do not know what breaking the fourth wall is, it's when the actor throws away a dialogue to make the audience feel that they are detached from the setting or the fictional character. So when we talk about,
Very impressive. Very impressive. We're having, this is where education starts. Okay.
yeah, so how important it is to break that fourth wall ताकि हम अपने आप को fictional character से detach समझे और आपके लिए भी character से बाहर निकलना कितना important है.
I'll take the question.
That's a very good question. Thank you so much. Is this working? I love breaking the fourth wall because I always find it's a little, sometimes it feels pretentious to kind of sit in front of a group of people and pretend they're not there. It to me feels a little unnatural. So I find that when I'm doing a show, whenever I can find an opportunity to do that, it's quite it's exciting, it's inviting, and it actually I find takes the energy of the show somewhere else. You know, I find that if I'm especially with things like soliloquies, when you're doing something like to be or not to be, instead of throwing it up into the air with the lights, when I bring it down here, there's a way for me to engage with the people. And I think that when you do something like a soliloquy, it is breaking the fourth wall. It's the one opportunity the actor gets, the character gets, to actually speak to the audience. And I find even with contemporary theater, when you speak to the audience directly and you break that fourth wall, you make them realize we are in a show and we're all in this together. It's actually a very special feeling. So thank you for that question. It's a great question.
So, any more questions? At the back there, there's somebody in blue in the middle. Is there a mic?
I think they should just stand up and speak loudly, and so we can save time.
Okay,
Hello.
We can hear you.
we can hear you. Go on. Huh.
I mean, you can. I think terms are kind of reductive. You know, you can call it regional, you can call it. I mean, it is a Pakistani movie. It comes from the region of Punjab, so I think it's not either or. It's both in a way. And I think the film did incredibly well, not just in Punjab. It also did incredibly well in Karachi. But of course, a lot of people needed the subtitles to understand the language properly and more more holistically. So, and I don't think that language is something or region is something particularly in Pakistan that can define what is commercial or what is not commercial. There are plenty of other films which have done really well in the past, like Khuda Ke Liye or Bol or other films, which were not in Punjabi as well. They were in Urdu, and so I don't think language is the deciding factor of what makes something commercial or not. I think it's more the idea, the style of storytelling that kind of appealed to a wider audience, and it would have even if it wasn't in Punjabi.
Okay, and a question now for Mira. So, who's
Yes,
asking a question to
No,
Mira?
I'm
no,
asking the question,
anybody.
please. I am,
At the back?
please.
Yeah, go ahead. I like women who speak loudly.
Shukriya. Sorry,
I am chastised. Thank you. Ji.
sorry, the first question is,
The first question,
yeah.
the ethical
ठीक है.
issues, I
Yeah.
think. Salam
You know,
Bombay.
making, जब Salam Bombay बनाई थी मैंने, it's actually, I would think that 5% of my energy in the day of shooting would be for directing. 95% was producing, was running, getting the next location, getting all of that, you know. But the key to that, making that film, was because we had a workshop for about 8 weeks prior to shooting, where we worked with about first 129 street kids, and I brought it down to 30 street kids. And the training of how they trained us and how we trained them to create a sense of focus and discipline and actual debate with each other. The workshop period made them so aware about what would going to happen when we were actually on the streets shooting, you know. So jab shooting chalu hua hai, they knew their focus, they knew what to do. And it was not, it was very difficult. It was, I think the first film was on the streets, so people would gather like do lakh, you know. It was just unbelievable, your people. So I was in a salwar kameez with a big fat rope around my waist every day, and at the end of the rope was a megaphone, and I would go and like Draupadi, you know, give one end of the rope to the crowd, and then I would twirl around and put the other end of the rope to the other end of the crowd, and I would then take the megaphone and I would sound like Indira Gandhi, and I would say, आइए हमारे काम देखिए, प्लीज़ हमारे डिस्टर्ब मत कीजिए, आप देखिए पर आप आवाज़ मत कीजिए, help us, we don't have any really money. And we didn't. It was 35 millimeter stock. I would have maximum 1 or 2 takes per shot. And so, but this is how I would work. There was no, I didn't have an assistant director. I didn't have many things. We just have about 7-8 people working on the film. So ऐसे हमने किया, where absorb the people, the crowds, into the act of working, because that was the only way to do it, you know. And some people would misbehave, you know. The last shot where Chai Pao is spinning the top and he's just killed a man and he's never going to be a child again, and he's weeping, was one long take. He had to come down a street, he had to sit down in this veranda jaise, he had to spin the top, and he was weeping. So very long take, and in the middle of this beautiful take, from upar, above the, you know, just above, in the flat above, somebody, just to be mischievous, dropped a flower pot through the frame, and it crashed right in the middle of him, and obviously it was useless. And I had literally only one more roll of emulsion left, because those days even film was quoted. You had to have, you could not buy endlessly, and it was not digital, तो बहुत ही महंगा था. Anyway, so the second take is no point losing your cool, just have to maintain that thing and you start it again. And imagine these children, imagine their focus and imagine their discipline. And he did it again, and that's the last shot that you see in the film, like this. So you have to do whatever you have, you know. A crowd challenge karti hai, so you absorb the crowd with you, because there is no other way to be on the streets and to film the drama that we were shooting on the streets. Yeah, thank you.
I know there are many more people who want to ask questions, but we actually don't, we've gone half an hour over. So I think we have to end it here. But before we go, Mira, this is the last session you're doing here.
That's right.
I would like you to say whatever you want to Lahore before we leave.
Bol ke lab azad hain tere. But yeah, well, I cannot tell you how happy it makes me to be here in Lahore. It took me 15 years to return. So please, please invite me again.
Thank you to the wonderful panel.